Welcome to the Norbertine Abbey of Santa Maria de la Vid. I'm Dr. Joseph Sandoval. I'm the Director of Communications here at the Abbey. And we're here on this chilly Saturday morning to listen to the third and final independent lecture in the Norbertine Library lecture series, God in Recovery. Today's topic is trauma. But to tell you more about that, please welcome the Norbertine Community's prior, as well as the founder of the Norbertine Library lecture series, the very Reverend Father Stephen Gertner.
Thank you, folks. Again, I appreciate you all braving the elements this chilly January morning to come out to this third installment. I will say, though, by way of advertisement, that we do have one more event in the series. We have, as we did last year, the concluding symposium for this lecture series on trauma. And that'll be on the 5th of April, and more information will be forthcoming about that. That'll be a panel presentation that will feature all three of our speakers, Dr. Lynn Hinton, Dr. Kay Horsley, and of course Dr. McKenna. And of course it'll be more sort of Q&A and things like that, so we will be sending out a description of that event. That'll be here at the Abbey as well in the morning. So just put that on your calendar if you've enjoyed what you've seen thus far. Just sort of by way of, I guess, a celebratory comment, we restarted the lecture series at the conclusion of 2023 after having obviously a disruption because of the pandemic. We really didn't know how this was going to go. I mean, people had not been congregating for a while and making mass gatherings and so forth. And I remember the very first event we did, we had one person that came. I'm not making this up, but it was very special because the one person that came was the Archbishop. So I was elated that he came. I was also kind of mortified because it's like, where's everybody? It was kind of the thing that we couldn't talk about, that he was the only person in this audience. Well, since then, though, because we've gradually gotten the word out and people have gradually, they've watched the events that we also recorded, that we put on YouTube, that we put online, and so forth, that, and because we've had excellent presenters, every presenter we've had last year and this year, has just hit it out of the park. And so as people have then maybe watched these things online and then maybe have started coming into the live events, the word has gotten out that we're sort of back in business post-pandemic. So it's taken a while for this to kind of reconstitute itself. And so to see today, again, the momentum continues, that we have a nice crowd here today, that we hope that you, A, enjoy the presentation, and B, that you spread the word, that if you like what we're doing, let us know. If you have suggestions, let us know. If you really like what we're doing, tell a friend. Tell a bunch of friends so that we continue to get people here. These things will always be gratis. Of course, we always accept free will donations. There's the box that you saw out there. Not to turn this into a fundraiser, but we want this very much to be a part of our outreach ministry as an Abbey, because part of what a library is for, part of what an Abbey is for, really is to be a ministry of service, a ministry to the community, to foster important conversations, important dialogue, the edification of, as I like to say, the human person adequately considered, and that's what we're doing today. And just by way of a transitional announcement, you notice when Dr. Sandoval introduced me, he did not introduce me as the library director, because as of the 1st of January, I am no longer the library director. And I'm very pleased to announce that our Abbot Emeritus, Joel Garner, who very much is responsible for the facilities that you see all around you, as our founding abbot here at Santa Maria de la Vid, he has generously agreed to take on the responsibility of becoming the next library director. Okay, and so if you like the lecture series and you want to see it continue, pester him. So we want to see more of these things. And so I'm sure he's going to do a wonderful job, as he's done with everything else that you see around on this community that we've had for the last 40 years. And of course, this is our 40th anniversary as a community here in New Mexico. So in a sense, this event also has a special ballast, because it marks from 1985 to the present our 40th year of ministry service here in the greater Albuquerque area. So without any further ado, if everybody has gotten their coffee and their snacks, I'm going to let Dr. Megan McKenna take it away as we then have this third lecture. And she did instruct me to tell all of you that you should sit next to somebody. Sit next to somebody because it's going to be part of the presentation that we're going to have somebody to talk to in the audience. And so if you're not sitting next to somebody, if you've isolated yourself somewhere, don't do that. Sit next to somebody. So without, again, any further ado, Dr. Megan McKenna.
Oops, sorry about that. Good morning. Steve forgot to tell you anything about me, but most of you know who I am. What I'm going to talk about is trauma. And basically, for the last 5 to 6 years, I have spent 4 to 6 months up in the Northwest Territories, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and the Arctic Circle, working with First Nations and the Committee for Reconciliation for the First Nations communities. So basically, I ended up trying to work with them on trauma and how to survive with grace after the 4 generations of the disappearance of the children, the students that were moved from church to church and school to school, and even from province to province. But during that time, I've also worked here in the United States with Indigenous people and in Australia and New Zealand. It is a problem that is widespread. Deb Hallen began the process here by having a committee collect all the names of the schools that the last one closed in 1964 of students that were moved or went into, who never returned, etc. The same problem as what was all across Canada. She came up with more than 300 schools that were in the same position as the Canadian schools. But she doesn't look like she's going to remain in her job because of other issues. So we don't know exactly where that's going to go. But all of the new book I have put out by Orbis is called The Bowl of Perfect Light, Stories of Forgiveness, Reconciliation, and Repair. So the book deals with how do you not just survive trauma, but repair your soul, your relationships, institutions, and structures afterwards. How do you begin to rise again? The stories, each chapter has stories from the First Nations or from around the world and scriptures. And we're going to deal with some of the ones on trauma. It's hard to talk about trauma because everybody thinks they've had it. Most of the time, anytime something untoward or terrible happens to us, we label it trauma. There is individual trauma, but most of the people who have dealt with trauma around the world deal with it in communities, that the communities themselves experience trauma and individuals within a community. And so we're going to first try the individual, and then we're going to use the scriptures and move into what does trauma look like and how do you deal with it in communities. Usually we think of trauma sometimes as the experience of a natural disaster, the fires, earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, that sort of thing, or an individual who experiences an accident, or even an individual violent experience. But trauma is, how do I say that? It's much larger than the individual experience. It is connected always to a community and a history. And the effects are accumulative. Everyone, the person who is experiencing trauma is connected to a whole group, and it begins to affect absolutely everyone. So it crosses boundaries of geography, of relationships, and of time. The groups I work with primarily have dealt with trauma for the last 4 generations. And one of the things they live with is, I let them take my children after I had been through what happened. I'm responsible for what happened to them. And then their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren are in the same position. It is much like racism, and most people would now say nationalism, as well as sexism. Though sexism is much more individualistic than the communal experience. But that's sort of just a generalized introduction to what we're going to talk about. I'm going to begin by telling you a story. Of course, the first rule in trauma is you tell the story. Until people have been heard, they can't do a thing. So the first rule in all trauma work is talk, and I will listen. The individuals who have had the experience, they need someone to listen. And most of us, we're good at talking, but we're not very good at listening. They say the first person who saves them is the one who listens and listens and listens over and over and over again. So that's why I said sit next to somebody so that you can talk. When you hear a story, you have to talk about it before we can go on from there. The story I'm going to tell you is Jewish. It's an old Jewish story from the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov, his name means the master of the good name, basically founded the Hadassim. Small pockets of them still live in Europe, primarily Eastern Europe, and there are a handful of communities here in the United States. They believed that the way to heaven and the way to live holy was to tell stories and dance with your neighbor. If I were a Jew, I would be in Hadassim. And it is a story about healing. So all stories are true. Some of them actually happened. And when I tell this one, it happens to you. So settle in and just listen. Once upon a time, the Baal Shem Tov, who was well known everywhere for being a healer and someone who was wise and listened to people and counseled them, had a visitor. He had been to see a doctor, and his leg was terribly infected. And after a long talk, he knew what he had to do, and when he left the Baal Shem Tov, he felt 100% better. Well, the man was walking down the street one day and ran into his previous doctor. And the doctor said to him, "What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be using that leg. Go home." And he said, "I'm so much better. I was healed." He said, "Who healed you?" He said, "The Baal Shem Tov." The doctor was livid. He decided to go visit the Baal Shem Tov and see what was going on. Knocked on the Baal Shem Tov's door, and as the rabbi, as most of them call him, opened the door, he welcomed him in. He said, "Do you heal people?" Didn't even get in the door. He said, "No, God does the healing. I just give him a little information." And the man said, "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." They argued back and forth, and he said, "Do come in. We need to talk." So he did come in, and he said, it was the doctor who suggested it. He said, "Why don't we check each other out? I'll examine you, you examine me, and we'll see who's the better doctor." Baal Shem Tov said, "That's fine. You start, since you are the real doctor." Well, he examined him thoroughly. He didn't give up. He kept looking through everything. He said, "There is absolutely nothing wrong with you. Your age, everything." He said, "You're in the best shape of anybody I've ever seen." And the Baal Shem Tov sighed and said, "I thought you'd say that. I didn't think you'd catch it at all." He said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You don't know what kind of agony I live in and how sick I really am." He said, "I ache. My heart aches. My mind is in turmoil." He said, "I live for one thing, that the peace and justice of the Holy One blessed be his name, is everyone's. And it isn't. Look around. He said, you don't know the kind of agony I live with all the time. But you didn't catch it. And then he said, now my turn. I'm going to examine you. So the Baal Shem Tov looked at the doctor, and he didn't do a thing. He went to put his hand on him, and the man pulled back. So he just looked at him, looked right in the eye for a very uncomfortable long time. Finally, the Baal Shem Tov said, you've lost something precious, haven't you? And the doctor just almost went white. He said, how did you know that? He said, what did you lose? He said, I lost a jewel, probably the most precious thing I own, certainly the most valuable. I was robbed. It wasn't, they think it was a gang that took it. He said, I've despaired of ever getting it back again. He said, yeah, that's your sickness. And the doctor said, what? My jewel, the one I lost, is my sickness? He said, yeah. You've forgotten the jewel that is the center of your life, what makes you live, why you live, and why your heart, your mind, your soul, everything that God gave you, you've forgotten what it's for. To live and honor the Holy One by living and loving all of them. And you forgot it. The two of them just stood there looking at each other. And the doctor started to weep. He couldn't find his voice. Finally he said, can you heal me? And the Baal Shem Tov said, you've already started to heal. Now we just have to give you over to a group of people who will help you find your way home and make you holy again. Now they say when they tell this story, the story has a happy ending. The man must have gone off, given to his new family to find the jewel he had lost. But this is a story, and it's about you. How is your story going to end today? Old Jewish story. Whenever you hear a story, usually three things immediately pop up. You got to forget about being true. Something that is true is everyone's story. So the three questions are, one, what does the story make you feel? How does it disturb you? And what are you going to do? Real simple. So why don't you take a moment, turn to whoever's sitting beside you or behind you or whatever next to you, and say what the story does to you, your heart. Don't think too much. The idea is always work below your neck. All right? The head won't get in there. Right? What does the story make you feel and stir up inside of you? And what is the most disturbing thing about the story? Take a few minutes and talk to each other, please. Okay, what does the story do to you? What does it make you feel? Yeah. Okay, the story leads her to listen to someone else, to their stories. Partly because of her age and what she's been through, she's now at the point where she can and wants to listen and be a part of someone else. I'm looking around at you. I'm 80. So I'm, most of you here, you're not 80, but you're getting close. And life shifts drastically between 70 and 80. And it shifts in your spirit as much as what's going on in your flesh. What else does the story do to you? Right? She is finding peace, but primarily in the scriptures every morning. And that the scriptures give her peace. What else does it do to you? Yeah.
To me, it brings hope. This kind of cold we are, we all have
okay? Gives you hope, reminds us that we all have promise. The name of the story is You Don't Even Know You're Sick. I've learned never to tell the title of a story to anybody because it sets you up for what you're going to hear. But it puts things into a perspective of, over time, what it's done to people. Do you even know that you're sick? Most of us are concerned physically quickly, and go and check it out. Spirit, soul, and heart, not so much. The second question was, what disturbs you in the story? The disturbing question is the most important. Even in scripture exegesis, the first question is, what does it make you feel? Or what do you think is going on? The second is, what disturbs you in the gospel? If it doesn't disturb you on a regular basis, you didn't get it. You were looking for something that you got, but you didn't necessarily. The scriptures are out to convert us, to change us, transform us, reconfigure us, etc. And so, what in this story gotcha? Okay?
That disturbed me a little bit. Am I just doing enough, barely, or am I?
Okay. Makes him feel, am I doing enough? Am I really involved, heart and soul and spirit? Or, pretending? Do we really live like the way we're supposed to love God? With all our heart and all our soul and all our mind and all our strength. Which means all of your resources, all of your knowledge, all your experience, all your relationships, and all the holes and lacks in you as well. Anything else the story does to you?
I saw a parallel in there with Mark's version of the rich man. And I say Mark's version because you were my scripture teacher for that. And but the part Mark is the only one that, in Mark's version, is the only one that says Jesus looked at him and
With
loving
love.
him said, "There's one more thing you need to do." And the question I always have is, am I tying myself to earthly goods and missing the goal?
Okay, in the Matthew story, the rich young man, it has often been called the 13th disciple or the undisciple because the story ends and leaves you hanging. We don't know what he did. He said, there is one more thing that you must do. And we forget that there is always one more thing that we must do. We think, I do this and I'm home free. And it's like, nope, you're, as Alice in Wonderland said, I'm not the same person I was yesterday. And so what is it today? That one more thing that we must do. Sometimes we even forget, like this story, what's your jewel? What's your treasure that's kind of gotten blurred and you forget about because you're too busy doing 101 other things. All right, and we're going to deal with that. Follow up to that person's story. You can't just listen and walk away. The word listen, in its root meaning in every language, means obey. So if you have heard, then you obey. Most of us listen to all kinds of things. In church, reading books, whatever, the news. If you listen, you obey. And if you don't obey, then you didn't hear a thing. Went in one ear and out the other. People who suffer individual trauma, and there are people in here who have, they are not heard. You need someone who hears on a regular basis that propels you to do something. In the story, the man is given a group of people to finish the healing. The number one rule to remember in trauma work is you cannot do this alone. It is other people who bring you back to life. It is other people who reground you and bring you literally, it's a surge of life. But contrary to individuality, you cannot heal alone. You cannot recover from trauma alone. It has too many far-reaching effects and consequences. We're going to use the story from the Gospel. It's the original last piece of John's Gospel in the resurrection story. You've heard it, you hear it every first Sunday after Easter, and you hear the first part of it after every Pentecost celebration. They cut off the second half for Pentecost. Hopefully you have cleaned up that piece and you don't need to hear it again. Close your eyes for a minute. The scriptures work just like stories. When you hear them, it literally gets in under your skin and into your soul and rattles you. So ask the Spirit to open your ears and to open your heart and open your mind so that you might really hear the good news. Okay, Spirit works quick. Open your ears, open your heart, open your mind, and open your eyes. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. On that evening of the first day of the week, while they were still behind locked doors for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood before them. Peace, he said to them, peace be with you. And they were startled. They were overjoyed. And so he said it again. Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, now I send you. And with that, he breathed on them and said, receive the Holy Spirit, whose sins you shall forgive. They are forgiven. But anybody you hold bound is held bound. Now, when Jesus came, Thomas, whose name means Didymus, twin, wasn't there. But they immediately told him about the Lord, but he refused to believe them. He said, I will not believe, and else I see him and his wounds, and I take my finger and put it into the wound in his hand, and take my fist and put it into the wound in his side. Then I'll believe. A week later, they were still in the locked room, and Jesus came again. And standing before them, he said, peace be with you. And turning to Thomas, he said, and you, come, take your finger and put it into the wound in my hand. Take your fist and put it into the wound in my side, and do not persist in your unbelief. And Thomas said, oh, my Lord and my God. And Jesus said, don't give me that. You only believed because you saw. What I say is, blessed are all of you who have not seen, and yet you have believed. Now, Jesus did many other things in the presence of his disciples, but these are written down so that you may come to believe in his name. This is the original ending of the Gospel of John. Gotcha. What did you hear in the story that you didn't hear perhaps before? And what disturbed you? One of the things we have to learn is that whenever you deal with God, he's out to get you. He's out to get us. Take a minute, again, turn to your neighbor. What did you hear that perhaps you heard differently or heard for the first time? And what disturbs you in the good news? Okay, we have to pull you back together. One of the things that I always tell people, the reason why stories are so important is because what you heard, somebody else needs to hear. And what somebody else needs to hear, they need it from you. That to hear a story and not share it in some way, shape, or form, the story dies. But to share it in some ways, the power of the story grows. Because I told one story, and for this piece, I told one piece out of the gospel, and every single one of us heard something different. And we need what other people have heard. What did you hear this time that was different, or you never heard it before, or whatever?
13th apostle.
Hmm?
The 13th apostle.
Okay, that wasn't part of the gospel, except from before. What did you hear from this piece?
Oh, okay.
Well, he woke me up and said, "Peace be with you." And I was like,
Right.
we were like, oh.
That word is done 3 times. The first, when he comes through the door, peace. It is a command. The second time, they're like, la, 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 la. Peace be with you. And the third time, when he turns on Thomas, peace be with you. Theologically, they say it is the peace of the Father, the Creator. It is the Lord, risen Lord, crucified. And the third is the peace of the Spirit. And it comes in 3 different ways to do 3 different things. But you never hear it when you read it. The gospel was never meant to be read. They wrote it down so you wouldn't forget it. The thing that changed my life practically forever in the 1960s was working in small base communities in Central America. Practically no one could read. But the person who could read it out loud, and then by the time they left that day, every one of them knew it by heart. It was written for your ear, not your eye. What else did you hear differently or you hadn't heard before? Or?
People in trauma, it takes time because even after a week, they were still locked up.
Right. They were a week. They have gotten the good news. They have seen the risen Lord. He has commissioned them to send them forth. And a week later, they're stuck. Why? One person can stop everything dead in its tracks. They tell the one person who wasn't there, and he utterly refuses to believe. That is why this gospel is done on the first Sunday of Easter. And then when they do it at Pentecost, they drop the part off of Thomas. Over the Easter season, we're to deal with all the Thomases and Thomasinas that stopped the good news dead because of their personal criteria for what they want before they believe. And so a week later, they're still in fear. The primary characteristic of people who have suffered trauma is the constant threat of being fearful. This is going to happen again. It's going to be worse. I have no control. And people feed fear. And you certainly can look around today in the world, and it's being fed. Fear is being fed by thousands of people, a lot of them claiming to be very good Christians. And we have to realize that we cause trauma. One of the characteristics of real trauma is that it is something done by one human being to another that is utterly destructive, evil, unjust, and intent on harming and causing suffering that will have massive ramifications. And that's Thomas. It has nothing to do with doubt. Jesus is very clear. The translation is clear. Do not persist in your unbelief. Your unbelief impacts massively everyone else that you're connected to. Who do we keep from actually grasping hold of the good news and living? We never think we're the one. But more often than not, we're definitely one of the 10 that got took. What else did you hear that you didn't hear like that before?
Jesus was pretty upset with kind of Thomas and says, okay, touch me, put your finger in it.
Right.
Yeah, I never really noticed that. I mean, I noticed it, but not
Yeah.
the way he said it.
His criteria, Thomas, is absolutely brutal. It is opening the wounds again and making it believe he will get to see the bleeding again. Take your finger and put it into the wound in my hand. And it's the word for fist. Put your fist into my side. By the way, in Greek, the word trauma is the same word for wound. And many of us act just like Thomas. I'm not going to do anything till I can see it happen again right here in front of me. And I will make it happen again and cause you more pain. And what are we doing as we look around today in the world, in the United States? Who are we going after? We want them to bleed again.
The least of our brothers and sisters.
Right, which covers more than all the people who aren't the least. Right, and the numbers of people who have been victimized and are being, and they intend to victimize again, is massive. We're lucky we're in a state where at least the leaders have decided not to obey, to resist. But few and far between. What else? What disturbs you or what got you? Go. That's the first thing that's out of his mouth. Go. As the Father has sent me, now I send you. We are disciples. We preach the gospel if we share it. That's the first thing out of his mouth. And that's the last thing they all intend to do. It takes some doing. Right? Go. The incarnation was so that Jesus would come here to us, and we live the incarnation when we go forth and be that for other people. Incarnation says, we just finished Christmas. The incarnation doesn't happen in you, in me. Doesn't matter if it ever happened. How do you feel about, I thought you were going to raise your hand. How do you feel about the second time you get the second piece? He breathes on them. You've been breathed on lately by the Spirit or anybody else for that matter. He got in close. All right? He breathed the Spirit, and this is why the Spirit is given. Whoever you forgive, they are forgiven. We have really concentrated on that one, and we still don't do too good. We are forgiven not for the past, but for the future, for now. And whoever, the old translation is the one you got. The new one says, and whosever sins you retain, they are retained. It says, whoever you hold bound is held bound. It is only, that word is only used twice in the scriptures in John's Gospel. The first is in the raising of Lazarus from the dead. Jesus calls Lazarus forth from the tomb by name, and he had been wrapped like a mummy, round and round and round, with a cloth over his head. The understanding is he was standing upright in the tomb. They would stand you upright, and as your bones collapsed, they'd push you further back in the tomb for the next person. So he calls Lazarus forth by name, and he fell out. And then Jesus says to them, you unbind him and set him free. When I first heard that, I was like, who moved? The women moved. The one who had bound him in the burial cloths the first time. So they would have unwrapped him slowly, unbound him from the cords of death. Stood him up on his feet, taken the cover over his eyes, turned him around, faced Jesus, and gave him a shove. And this is the way you deal with trauma. You unbind people from the cords of death, from all the things they have experienced. It is an arduous process. And then stand them back up again and turn them around to face the future. And Jesus says the Spirit that we were breathed on was given not just to forgive, but to unbind and hold bound. Holding bound always has the sense of struggling and grasping to stop evil. The Spirit in John's Gospel, we are to witness and prove the world wrong about sin, evil, injustice, violence, etc. That along with forgiving, we have to stand firm and bind people and stop them from what they are doing. And it is an arduous process that we're not very good at. And bind people. Might go home today and start, who needs a little binding? Stop them dead in their tracks. That's nonviolent resistance. To stand against injustice and violence and the destruction of other human beings and death in all its forms. And at the same time we forgive, you stop it. You resist. She spoke about mercy. The first step of mercy is justice. And in order to get to mercy, you got to go through a lot of justice. And most of us are a little low on the justice part. Mercy? That's jumping, quantum leaping into another world. Anything else in the story get you? Blessed are you. The gospel ends with John's beatitude. Blessed are you who you haven't seen, and yet you do believe. All right? The way we have seen is the Scripture. The way we see is in other human beings. If Thomas could stop them dead in their tracks, the others open the door, conquer fear, unbind, forgive, and raise people from the dead. Basically, trauma is looking at the wounds, the first thing he does is he shows them the wounds at his hands and feet and his side. Right? And so you got to look at the wounds. You have to listen to the words. The wounds and the words are connected. And then forgive and unbind and hold bound. And then the peace. That is the peace of the Father, the Creator, which is for the whole universe. The peace of the crucified and risen Lord, which was standing right in front of them. And the peace of the Spirit, that is the power to live this way. Then we know peace. Okay, that was a mini reflection on that piece of John. Turn to your neighbor, what does that do to you? Where are you now? The first words out of God's mouth when Adam and Eve are in the garden is, where are you? And it is not a geographical location question. Where are you? Turn to your neighbor and see where you're at. Where are you? Unsettled. Good. Marvelous. Again, we think of God as always comforting and always peaceful and always, thank you very much, rather than God is so unlike us, it's pathetic. And the scriptures are written to convert us, to challenge us, to rattle our cages. But we don't get rattled too often. We think a nice sermon is, yeah, that was good. Well, off we go. And if you actually speak the gospel, the Episcopalian bishop, some of us are horrified. What? They got angry about mercy? We have streaks of that in us, of holding other people accountable for stuff we don't deal with. And we're due for a major radical overhaul as church. I just finished reading this book. This is my morning over my oatmeal reading. It's by Greg Boyle, a Jesuit, who founded Homeboys in LA. And he has created a community to deal with violence and gangs. It's called Cherished Belonging. Right? It's literally the best book I've read, and I can't remember. Definitely go get it. It's called The Healing Power of Love in Divided Times. It tells us how to not only live with people who have been traumatized, but become with them people of hope. How to raise people from the dead. Raising people from the dead is a long process, same as dealing with trauma. And the people who can teach us the best are the people who we think need help. The people who are going to save us, and they certainly will reveal us for who we are, is the immigrant community, the LGBT community, the refugee community, anybody who's considered an outsider or one of them. They're going to save us. The poor have always saved us. I spent most of my 60s and 70s in Central and Latin America. And that's where I learned to do the scriptures. That's where I learned how to be a human being. And I remember saying to a group of women one day, I don't think I'm going to make it in. When this is all said and done, I don't think I'm going to make it in. And they all started laughing. And they said, don't worry, Gringa. When you get to the gate and they don't let you in, go around back. We'll throw a ladder over the wall and make sure you get in. If we don't make friends with the children of God who are the least among us, we in deep shit. And I used that word. Another person who taught me a great deal, his name was Sebastian Muselli. He has since died. He had about 6 kids that he adopted from Haiti, as well as running his parish and working in the Haitian community. And I was moaning and groaning one day to him and sent him a note. He sent me a note back, which I have never forgotten. He said, honey, you are to live your life in such a way that when you wake up and your feet hit that floor, Satan or anybody like him says, oh shit, she's awake. I have never forgotten that. We are all, every morning when we get up together, when our feet hits that floor, say, here, shit. They're all awake. That is how we are to live our life. Where else are you? You cannot do it alone. Dorothy Soleil, a German theologian, said, the one thing that has destroyed Christianity more than anything else is this obsession with personal spirituality and your personal relationship with God. It has destroyed Christianity. We learn nothing about God except through other people. Make friends. Where are you? It is good news. That's the other thing you got to remember. It is good news. You got to stick with it. We have been raised. We have been summoned. We have been sent forth. We have been given the Spirit. And so hopefully, that's what we're here to give away. You're always going to be, I don't know the right word. You're not always going to be able to do what you want because you can't speak the language. But if you make friends with people, after a while, the language is not that important. But you got to be friends with them. It means you eat with them, you struggle with them, you stand with them, you stand behind them, you protect them, you do everything that they need. And they'll grab hold of you.
And may I just add that you let them guide you?
Yes. And that happens very quickly. Once you're friends with somebody, your friends are the ones who will actually tell you what you need to hear.
And it's a humbling experience.
Oh, you betcha.
You think this is the way things should be done. And they push back and they say, that's not what I need.
Right.
This is what I need.
Right. Listen. Always listen. And look. And you will get it. But again, it takes time. You got to make friends with people. And most of us now are at a disadvantage because of what's happening. We are not comfortable with the people who absolutely need us to stand with them in solidarity and stand behind them and start protecting. The one thing I love about this book is Greg Boyle and the people who work there, the homeboys, they created a community together that they pull people into. It is the best example of what a parish should look like that I have ever seen. Most of us are individual believers and Catholics who, come and go. We do a little here, but the way we think of serving church is stuff we do in liturgy and devotional stuff, which none of it is going to matter when he says, well, what about those people? Who'd you bring with you? We have to end, so I have to tell you a story. This is one of my favorite First Nations stories. It comes from the Maumee, who are basically in northern Wisconsin, Minnesota, and on the other side of the Canadian border. And the name of the story is The Turtle and the Eagle. Whenever I'm wondering what story to tell, all of the First Nations say, turtle and eagle. In fact, the reason why I have been accepted in the northern communities of the First Nations is because I have never told a white story. I told their stories. I studied, I researched, I did everything. It took a lot of time. I remember Chardin's line, research is the first step in adoration. And so I learned their stories. Every time I got up to tell one that I'd never told before, I was terrified. But that was why I was accepted in. The leaders said, we'll listen. Okay, turtle and eagle. Get your images of turtles and eagles. Once upon a time, it was a long time ago, the Great Spirit had pretty much finished creation. Few details he hadn't put in yet, and it was gorgeous. All these creatures that flew and swam and crawled, they were wild, they were tame, and they were only told one thing: you're free. You can roam anywhere and do anything you want. And so creation was moving along, and one winter, Eagle got bored. And he said, I don't have anything to do. He said, I'm going to play a game. I'm going to challenge the animals and the birds to a fight, to a duel. And whoever wins, I get to take them as a slave. Well, he cheated. He started off with Bear. He waited till the bear was just groggily crawling out of his cave, barely knew what was going on, got challenged, lost immediately. He had Bear. Bear became his slave. Well, he went from one animal to another, even the porcupines, everybody. Then he went for the other birds, he went for hawks, he went for little birds. Well, over a period of time, he got everybody. Everyone now had to do what Eagle wanted, and not just what they wanted. He was always watching to see what they were doing, and interfering and interrupting, except there were two holdouts. Muskrat and Turtle, they hid from him. They had a little place that they would go and hide. They'd go underwater if necessary and hide from him. They were lonely, the two of them. They knew everybody else had been caught already. They were afraid that the other animals would turn them in. This went on for a while. And one day, one morning, when they woke up, they would meet together, and Turtle said, Muskrat, I had a dream last night. Oh, said Muskrat, that's good. What was the dream? He said, the Great Spirit came to me. The Great Spirit, that must have been a great dream. What was it? The Great Spirit told me I'm supposed to challenge the eagle to a race. Oh, that's not so good. Muskrat said, why would you do that? Did the Great Spirit tell you how to win? Not exactly. What do you mean, not exactly? He told me I had to challenge him to a race, and that I would be able to set all the animals free. That's all he told you? Yeah. Oh dear. Well, Turtle would obey. He crawled out and brought his buddy with him and said, Eagle, Eagle. Eagle came swooping down and said, I'm challenging you to a race. Well, Eagle knew there were hideouts, and he thought, oh, okay. And then he looked at Muskrat and Turtle and thought, this will be a trick. And so he said, what? He said, I'm challenging you to a race, and whoever wins, we change the rules. What do you mean? He said, if I win, then I set all the animals free, and everybody gets to tell the story. But if you win, then we're all slaves. Eagle thought, a muskrat for a turtle? He said, you're on. Well, the word spread everywhere that they were going to have a race, and they were all deciding, well, we've got to cheer for Turtle. He's our only hope. And then the realistic ones stood up and said, Turtle couldn't beat anything, let alone an eagle. They said, we don't have any other possibilities. We got to go with Turtle. So the day came, and they all came out to watch. And Eagle strutted out, and Turtle crawled out, and he said, you ready for a race? Turtle said, I am. And he said, okay, where are we going to start? Eagle said, I'll let you choose that, since I already know where we're going to end. And Turtle said, oh, thank God. Thank the Great Spirit. Thank the Great Spirit. He said, I know exactly where we're going to start. He said, Eagle, you're going to take me in your talons, and you're going to fly as high as you possibly can go. And when I yell, drop me, the race starts. And whoever hits the ground first wins. Eagle couldn't believe it. He thought, I can't get out of this. I can't lose face. He said, oh, all right. Muskrat, his eyes were bugging out of his head. Well, he picked him up, and off they went. They soared and soared and soared, and when they could barely even see Eagle or Turtle, they heard the voice, drop me! And he did. And he sank like a stone, a rock, heading straight for the ground. But Eagle swooped down and dove for the ground. But as Eagle got close, he skimmed the top and kept going. And of course, Turtle, splash, he landed, bam, right on his shell. And there was silence everywhere. They all gathered around, and Turtle didn't move. For the longest time, Muskrat thought, I knew this was going to happen. Even if he beat him, he's going to be a mess. And then slowly, one little leg came out. And then the other leg came out. And the shell was rocking back and forth. His head came out, and he was like so dizzy. Muskrat flipped him over, and they went crazy. We're free. We're free. Well, they all celebrated, and soon, off celebrating, it was just Muskrat and Turtle and Eagle. Eagle was pissed. Eagle came over and said, Turtle, you may be wise, but you didn't do this on your own. That's right, said Turtle. The Great Spirit helped me. He told you what to do. He said, yep, he did. He told me how to win. The only thing he didn't tell me was I wasn't gonna die. He told me that I would set them free, but he didn't tell me I'd get to live. Turtle was really angry. Muskrat was stunned and said, really? Yes, Turtle said, and the Great Spirit told me a few other things. Things are going to change. We've had this place to ourselves for a long time, but there are some two-leggeds coming, and they're red. And they're going to be here, but they are going to follow the Great Spirit. They will call this place Turtle Island. And they will always be free, no matter what anybody does. But then later, way later, there are going to be more two-leggeds. They're going to be white and all kinds of other variations, and they're going to follow the eagle. And they're not going to know what it's like to be free, even when they think they are. Remember, eagle. Remember, the Great Spirit created us to be free together, no matter what anybody thinks. And I'm going to remember forever. He didn't tell me I was going to live, but we will all live no matter what. Old creation story. Trauma. The stories tell us how not just to survive trauma, but to touch the wound, put a scab on it, stay with it, and that we need other people to set us free. Our first baptismal promise is, do you promise to live forever in the freedom of the children of God? And the second one is, do you promise to resist evil and violence and all that is wrong with every fiber of your being? The third one they've changed in many places to read, do you promise to live under no sign of power but the sign of the cross? It's time for us to remember the most crucial thing, that God created us for his freedom, his life, and that raising people from the dead is the way we live, and it is most certainly how to deal with trauma. Thank you. I brought copies of the book, The Bowl of Endless Light. The Bowl of Endless Light is a creation story from the Hawaiian people. So there are all kinds of stories in the book on forgiveness, reconciliation, restorative justice, and what is called tikkun olam. How do you repair your soul, repair relationships, repair structures and institutions, and celebrate resurrection? So that's the new book. Came out from Orbis just about a month ago, from Orbis, New York. I also brought with me the book before that called The Poor Save Us. And that's stories of people from around the world over the last 60 years or so who saved me and taught me how to live. And then 2 people said, would you bring the Lenten book? So yes, I brought the Lenten books. And then 1 person said, did you bring the book on women? And this will be remembered of her, so I brought 2 of those. So they're over there. Basically, they've been rounded off and dropped out. Thank you. There is a saying among storytellers, if there is no one to listen, then there's no story to tell. So I thank you for listening.